Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Now, imagine that everything you've learned about the history of humanity might not be the whole truth. Imagine for a moment that the foundations of civilization, the dates we repeat in school, the maps so carefully drawn in books, all of it might be nothing more than what remained after a great collective amnesia. What if entire cities existed before the first known cities? What if incredible technologies were wiped from the world's memory like dust carried off by the wind? What if the gods of ancient legends were, in truth, flesh and blood men? Or perhaps something more? The earth speaks, in buried ruins, in invisible lines drawn across the sky, in stones carved with impossible precision, in monuments that defy time and understanding. The earth whispers, and for those who truly listen, its echoes tell a different story, a fragmented story, buried under centuries of silence, forgotten by the official voices, yet preserved in myths, in symbols, in structures that shouldn't exist, a story that begins before the beginning. Linear time, the one we measure with calendars and clocks, does not exist in the memory of the earth. Here, the ages blend. The past is a fractured mirror, each shard reflecting a different piece of what we were and what we could have been. Between these cracks, glimpses of a world that blossomed long before Sumer, Egypt, or China appear. A world where science was symbolic, architecture was celestial, and energy was a bridge between the visible and the invisible. A world that may have been real, and now sleeps beneath the soil, waiting to be remembered. But why would we forget something so grand? Why hide civilizations that mastered the secrets of sound, light, gravity, and perhaps even consciousness itself? Could it be fear, control, or maybe just a natural cycle of forgetting and rebirth? Perhaps deep knowledge needs silence to bloom. Perhaps like stars, it must vanish from sight in order to shine again. Each year, excavations reveal the unexpected. Structures that don't match any known timeline. Objects that seem crafted by hands more skilled than today's finest engineers. Ancient maps showing continents covered in ice, at times when supposedly no one was there to see them. Inscriptions in unknown languages, statues with eyes that gaze into eternity, and towers built with stones heavier than any modern machine can move. How is any of this possible? Scientists debate, skeptics scoff, but the curious, they listen. And it is for the curious that this journey begins. Not as a manual or an absolute truth, but as an invitation to see the invisible, to hear the inaudible, to remember what was forgotten. A walk through ancestral ruins, sunken seas, deserts etched with signs, mountains sculpted with wisdom, and temples that whisper words long lost. This is not a script about answers. It is a journey through questions, through mysteries, through wonders that might explain not only what happened, but why we are still so fascinated by what we cannot comprehend. Each block of this story will be a key, a clue, a symbol, an echo. So, take another breath. Let your mind drift. Let your certainties rest. Let time stop running. You are about to cross the gates of the Earth's ancestral memory. A forgotten story, but not erased. A story written in stone, in the skies, in the waters, and within you. Ready to remember what the world has forgotten. Long before we wrote on stone or papyrus, long before kings raised thrones or empires carved their legacy into iron and fire, perhaps long before all of it, there were civilizations that left no scrolls, but left vibrations, traces, marks that do not fade with time, only hide. History books begin where writing begins. But what came before that? What existed when there was no ink? When human memory was passed only through the sound of a voice? What existed when even silence had no name? Among archaeologists, this time before the record is called prehistory. But maybe a more fitting name would be the Age of Forgetting. Because in this letterless limbo, there may have lived people whose knowledge today is labeled as myth. People who built without machines, sailed without compasses, healed without scalpels. People who vanished without explanations, only myths left behind, and like all great myths, they refuse to die. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, names that float between the fantastic and the possible. Some say they are inventions, others that they are distant memories of a truth that was erased. The truth is, these places appear in countless cultures, with strikingly similar details, even among people who never met. Sunken islands, lost continents, advanced civilizations swallowed by the sea, by fire, by time. Plato spoke of Atlantis as a mighty empire with refined architecture, organized armies, and a society that mastered law, art, engineering, and spirituality as if all were one science. But he also warned, Atlantis fell. It sank in a single day and night of cataclysms. That's what he heard from the Egyptian priests. But what if the philosopher wasn't merely writing an allegory? What if he was echoing an ancestral tale? In ancient Hindu traditions, we find the continent of Lemuria, or Kumari Kandam, a place where the first humans lived, learned, and then were lost, vanished into the ocean, into eternal silence. People who spoke with the skies, who read the stars, who understood the vibration of every stone, every cell, a world where science and spirituality were not enemies, but sisters. And in Polynesian and South American traditions, we encounter the continent that once existed in the Pacific, inhabited by beings of immense wisdom and physical forms unlike ours. Some accounts claim they mastered levitation, the control of the Earth's telluric forces, and lived in harmony with the planet's magnetic field. Myths? Maybe. But why do such similar legends arise in places so far apart? What's more likely? That isolated civilizations invented the same myths, or that they're all remembering, each in their own way, something real that was lost to time, something shattered, like an ancient vase whose fragments were scattered across cultures. And now, we try to piece them together, not knowing the original shape. The world is older than our eyes can perceive. Forests hide structures, deserts bury cities, glaciers protect relics, and the oceans, the oceans are the greatest tombs in history. Down there, far from satellites, there may be evidence. Sunken temples, sculptures of forgotten faces, stairways that lead nowhere, or perhaps somewhere we don't yet understand. And the most curious thing, the more we excavate, the more questions arise. In places like the coast of India, submerged Japan, the Yonaguni stones, we see signs of underwater architecture that defy the official timeline. Who built it? When? For what purpose? And why are there no records? Or perhaps the records were erased as well. All signs point to cycles, rise and fall, memory and forgetting, like the long breath of earth inhaling knowledge and exhaling silence. With each new discovery, we begin to wonder whether we are truly the pinnacle of civilization, or simply one of its many comebacks. And that changes everything. It changes how we look at the past and at ourselves. Because if there was a time before time, an era before history, then perhaps we are merely the latest heirs to a legacy far older than we can imagine. A legacy that pulses in the stones, in the stars, in the whispers of the wind. A legacy that insists on returning. And so we continue, walking deeper into the labyrinth of what we forgot, in search of something that has always been waiting for us. A memory hidden beneath layers of earth, of water, of doubt. A memory that just, maybe, might reveal who we truly are. Imagine a circular city, surrounded by rings of land and sea, built with geometric perfection, where canals connected the urban sectors like veins carrying vital energy. Imagine temples devoted to knowledge, colossal statues gleaming under the sun, hot and cold fountains springing in hanging gardens, and a people who mastered not only engineering but also the secrets of the soul. That place, according to Plato, once existed, and its name echoes through the centuries, like an eternal whisper. Atlantis. The story begins around 360 BC, when Plato wrote the dialogues Timaeus and Critias, in which he presents Atlantis as a naval power that existed 9,000 years before his time, a glorious and advanced civilization that supposedly challenged ancient Greece, and was swallowed by the ocean in a single day and night of catastrophe. Many consider this tale a moral metaphor, a warning about the arrogance of empires. But what if it's more than that? What if behind the myth lies the memory of something real? Plato claimed to have heard the story from Solon, a Greek lawmaker who, in turn, heard it from Egyptian priests. According to them, Atlantis was an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, a land of abundance and sophistication. But its moral decline, they said, provoked the wrath of the gods, and its total submersion. That narrative aligns with other myths found across the globe: floods, the fall of civilizations, divine punishment, and lost lands. Curiously, modern science has uncovered clues that reignite the debate. Geological studies suggest cataclysmic events did occur in the past, such as the collapse of volcanic islands, abrupt changes in sea levels, and even asteroid impacts. Some theories point to Santorini in the Aegean Sea as a possible site for Atlantis, an island that exploded around 1600 BC, triggering massive tsunamis that may have destroyed coastal civilizations. Other scholars propose even bolder locations: the Caribbean, Antarctica, the coast of Spain, the Sahara Desert. In 2011, satellite images revealed a submerged circular formation near the Gulf of Cadiz in Spain, with features resembling Plato's description. While nothing has been conclusively proven, the doubt remains, like a spark glowing in a field of mist. There are also those who link Atlantis to the Sea Peoples, who invaded Egypt around 1200 BC and then mysteriously vanished. Others connect it to the Olmecs of the Americas, the Celts of Western Europe, or the Sumerians of the Middle East, as if fragments of Atlantis had scattered into multiple cultures after the fall, echoes of a shared origin dispersed by the winds of time. And there is another layer, deeper, more symbolic. Some esoteric scholars view Atlantis not as a geographical place, but as a state of consciousness, a golden age of humanity, where reason and intuition, science and spirituality lived in harmony. The fall of Atlantis, in that sense, would represent the loss of balance, the fall of man into himself, a collapse not only physical, but also psychic, moral and vibrational. Interestingly, indigenous, African and Eastern traditions speak of ancient eras, cosmic cycles, in which humanity reached high levels of wisdom, only to decline and begin again. The Hindus, for instance, describe the yugas, vast epochs that rotate like cosmic seasons. Atlantis could have been part of one of these cycles, a blossoming that preceded forgetting. The question hangs in the air. What if Atlantis is more than a legend? What if it's the memory of a world that existed before history? A world swallowed not only by water, but by forgetting, and that still pulses today in our oldest dreams, our strangest intuitions, our thirst for something we cannot quite explain. Because maybe it's not just about finding Atlantis, but about remembering Atlantis within ourselves. Remembering that we were once more than we are now. Remembering that the past may hold the seed of the future, and that the waters which covered its cities still reflect the sky, like mirrors of a forgotten truth. Imagine a time when humans had barely mastered fire, and were already erecting temples with perfectly carved stone columns. Imagine a site built with multi-ton blocks, arranged in ceremonial circles, filled with detailed sculptures, mystical symbolism, and precise architectural organization, thousands of years before the pyramids, before writing, before the wheel. This place exists, and its name, whispered among archaeologists and dreamers, is Göbekli Tepe. Located in southeastern Turkey, near the city of Şanlıurfa, Göbekli Tepe was discovered by chance in 1994, but its existence came as a shock to traditional archaeology. Because it's not just ancient, it is absurdly ancient. Initial dating points to 9600 BC, over 11,000 years ago. That means this temple was built 7,000 years before the pyramids of Egypt, and about 6,000 years before Stonehenge. In other words, it shouldn't exist. The site consists of dozens of T-shaped stone pillars, up to 6 meters tall and weighing over 20 tons each. These pillars are arranged in concentric circles, like symbolic gateways or cosmic clocks. Many of them feature intricate carvings of animals, snakes, boars, birds, scorpions, sculpted with craftsmanship that simply doesn't match what is assumed about the era. But the most puzzling part is that all of this was created by people who, according to textbooks, were still living as hunter-gatherers. How could humans, supposedly nomadic, have built such a grand temple with such precise engineering, without cities, agriculture, or metal tools? Who coordinated this project? How were the stones moved? Why would anyone build something so monumental at a time when survival was the only concern? These questions still echo among scholars. Some theorize that Göbekli Tepe was the birthplace of organized religion, a sanctuary where people gathered for cosmic rituals and celebrations. Others suggest it marks the civilizational turning point. It wasn't agriculture that made temples possible. It was temples that created the need for agriculture, villages, and social organization. In other words, spirituality came before civilization. But some go even deeper. They examine the astronomical alignment of the pillars, the geometric placement of the circles, the recurring symbols that resemble universal patterns, and they see something more. A lost knowledge, an ancestral legacy from a forgotten civilization that understood the connection between sky and earth, and recorded it in stone, as if shouting to the future, "We were here. We knew." Göbekli Tepe also holds an additional secret. After centuries of use, it was intentionally buried with dirt, stone, and rubble, as if its builders wanted to protect it or hide it. Why? From whom? From what event? This deliberate act of concealment preserved the temple for millennia. But it also deepened the mystery. Could Göbekli Tepe be a relic from a time before history? A trace of a civilization that arose earlier than we ever imagined and vanished before leaving records? Or is it a testimony of a wisdom that defies chronology? A knowledge that awakens whenever human consciousness crosses a certain threshold? In every stone at Göbekli Tepe, a question pulses. In every carving, a key. In every circle, a spiral of possibilities. Perhaps the most important thing isn't to explain how it was built, but to listen to what it's trying to tell us. Because there, among millennia-old rocks and ancient sand, may lie the oldest echo of the human soul. The first whisper that we were more than survivors. We were seekers, creators, builders of meaning. And now that the temple has awakened, perhaps it is our turn to excavate, not only the earth, but the memory we allowed to fall asleep. Somewhere in the dark depths of the Aegean Sea, among submerged rocks and the silence of millennia, a secret lay dormant, an object corroded by time, hidden among the remains of a forgotten shipwreck, waiting patiently for human hands to find it. In 1901, Greek divers searching for statues and sunken treasures brought to the surface a strange fragment, a broken, oxidized mass of bronze, unrecognizable at first glance. Little did they know they had just awakened what would later be called the first computer in history, the Antikythera Mechanism. Its name comes from the nearby island of Antikythera, but the artifact, with its delicate gears, mysterious inscriptions, and multiple layers of complexity, soon revealed itself to be far more than anyone imagined. For decades, scientists struggled to decipher its function. Only in the 21st century, with the help of ultra-precise tomography, did the object's true nature begin to emerge, a revelation as astonishing as it was perplexing. The Antikythera Mechanism was an analog astronomical device, capable of accurately predicting the movements of the sun, the moon, the known planets of the time, and even eclipses. It contained at least 30 bronze gears, many with finely calibrated teeth, operating together like a cosmic clock. A system that reproduced celestial cycles with a precision that rivals, or even surpasses, some modern instruments. And all of this in the 2nd century BC. How is it possible that over 2,000 years ago, someone conceived such a sophisticated technology? The engineering behind the device required not only astronomical and mathematical knowledge, but also mastery of metallurgy, microfabrication, and advanced mechanical design. Most astonishingly, there are no other record shows of similar machines being used at the time, as if it had appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Most scholars attribute the invention to a circle of Greek intellectuals, possibly inspired by the works of Archimedes. Yet no direct evidence links any single inventor to the device. It's as if the knowledge needed to build it was gathered momentarily, and then lost in the abyss of history. What the Antikythera Mechanism represents goes far beyond its astronomical function. It is a temporal rupture, an artifact that doesn't fit the linear path we've drawn for human development. It forces us to consider that there may have been peaks of brilliance, islands of technological advancement, singular moments of genius that emerged and disappeared, like shooting stars across a forgotten sky. Were there other machines like it? Is the Antikythera Mechanism just a surviving fragment of a more complex, more inventive, more daring world than we're willing to accept? And if it's not an anomaly, but a clue, a loose piece of a much greater puzzle that includes ancient temples, impossible maps, megalithic structures, and buried memories. In a world where we assume linear progress, the Antikythera is a reminder that human knowledge does not evolve in a straight line. It pulses, vanishes, resurfaces. It can concentrate in visionary hands, disappear in wars, be reborn in new cultures. It might be hidden right now, in sealed caves, in sunken ships, in erased books, or in other machines yet to be found. Perhaps the Antikythera Mechanism was made for more than calculations. Perhaps it was made to endure, to be discovered, to remind us that the past holds ingenuity we have forgotten to honor, and maybe to silently ask us, what else once existed that we have yet to find? In the heart of the Peruvian desert, where the sun scorches the land with an almost supernatural light and the wind carries particles of time, there lies a plain marked by silences no one fully understands. There, under the watchful gaze of the mountains and the distant eye of the stars, rest lines that seem crafted by giants or gods. Perfectly straight paths, spirals that intertwine, trapezoids, colossal animals drawn with a precision that defies reason. These are the enigmatic Nazca Lines. For centuries, these drawings remained unknown to humanity, not because they were hidden, but because they are only visible from above. From the ground, the plain seems ordinary, but once you rise, even just a few meters, a new dimension emerges. The earth becomes a canvas, and the desert transforms into a message. The question that echoes through generations is both simple and disconcerting. Who made these lines? How? And why? The lines were officially discovered in the 1920s, but are believed to have been created between 500 BC and 500 AD by the Nazca culture. Using simple techniques, such as removing the dark gravel on the surface to expose the lighter soil beneath, these civilizations managed to create figures hundreds of meters long, without the aid of machines, drones, or balloons. That alone is a feat of planning, symmetry, and vision. But the complexity goes further. Some figures are clear depictions: a monkey with a spiral tail, a hummingbird with delicate wings, a spider with detailed anatomy, a whale, a tree. Others are more abstract: geometric labyrinths, runway-like strips, symmetrical crossings, repetitive patterns. Many scholars believe they were part of the religious rituals, used to invoke rain, honor the gods, or guide spiritual ceremonies. But what if it's more than that? Researchers like Maria Rijke, who dedicated her life to studying the lines, noticed that many of them align with astronomical phenomena. Some point directly to where the sun rises or sets during solstices. Others appear to trace the paths of constellations or mark specific dates in the agricultural calendar. This suggests that the Nazca weren't just drawing. They were just connecting the sky to the earth, as if each line were a prayer traced in stone and dust. But there is more. Some figures exhibit geometric measurements that suggest advanced mathematical understanding. Others follow patterns resembling electrical circuits or harmonic graphs. This has led to bolder, and often marginalized, theories that suggest external intelligences, contact with advanced civilizations, or even remnants of a time before the Nazca, when other forgotten peoples mastered knowledge now lost to us. Could the Nazca Lines be a celestial book, written to be read only by the stars, a map, a guide for celestial travelers, a message left by those who understood the movement of the heavens, the magnetism of the earth, and the cycle of life on a different frequency? Many argue that the only way to create such perfect, large-scale figures would be from an aerial perspective. But the Nazca, officially, never flew. They had no technology for it. Or did they? And we've simply forgotten. Some scholars have proposed the use of rudimentary hot air balloons, simple yet functional structures. Others believe the lines bear the imprint of inherited wisdom, passed down through generations from a time beyond memory. In the end, the Nazca Lines remain, untouched by rain, protected by the desert's dryness, preserved like a deliberate mystery, as if they were mbo, a bridge between two worlds, the visible and the invisible, an invitation to contemplation, a provocation for those who dare to seek. They remind us that not everything must be understood to be true, that the past can be as poetic as it is practical, and that sometimes the greatest messages aren't hidden. They are in plain sight, written in a language we've yet to learn how to read. Water holds secrets that time has forgotten. Beneath calm waves, beneath stormy seas, beneath icy currents and abyssal silences, lie traces of a world that may never have been fully told. Hidden ruins, stairways that lead to nowhere, walls covered in algae, columns asleep among schools of fish. The ocean floor, contrary to what many believe, is not an empty space. It is a cemetery of civilizations, a sanctuary of forgetting, a book whose pages were turned by tsunamis, ice ages, and continental collapses. And within that sunken book may lie some of the greatest truths about who we once were. One of the most fascinating discoveries emerged off the coast of Dwarka, India. For a long time, the city of Dwarka was believed to be only a legend found in Hindu sacred texts, associated with the god Krishna. But in 2001, sonar images revealed rectangular structures, alignments, and paved paths more than 30 meters beneath the surface. Subsequent dives and excavations suggested the ruins could be more than 9,000 years old, placing their construction long before the civilizations officially recognized as the first in history. Could it be that Hindu myths are, in truth, encoded memories of a real city? On the other side of the world, near Japan's Yonaguni Island, a submerged formation caught the world's attention. With regular steps, flat surfaces, sharp angles, and platforms resembling ziggurats, the so-called Yonaguni Monument looks more like deliberate construction than natural formation. Some geologists classify it as a work of nature, but there are lines, corners, and carvings that challenge that idea. If it is in fact human-made, then it would date back more than 10,000 years, a time when, according to official history, humans were still hunters and gatherers. There are even more discoveries. In the Caribbean Sea, divers have reported columns, stone walkways, and geometric patterns near Cuba and the Bahamas, especially around the infamous Bermuda Triangle, where sonar detected pyramid-shaped structures at extreme depths. There are also records of alleged stone blocks with undeciphered inscriptions and roads that disappear into the sand, as if leading to cities that vanished with time. These submerged clues force us to rethink the story of humanity. Because for a structure to be underwater today, it must have been built when that region was still dry land, which in many cases dates back to glacial periods, when sea levels were tens of meters lower. This takes us to an era when there were supposedly no civilizations, let alone architecture. But if these constructions exist, and they do, then either history is wrong, or it is incomplete. And what if the Great Flood, present in so many cultures around the world, is not just a metaphor? The Sumerians spoke of the Great Deluge. The Bible tells of Noah's Ark. Hindu texts describe Manu and the boat that saved the sages. The Maya, the Norse, the Australian Aboriginal peoples all have versions of the same tale, a catastrophic flood that swallowed entire cities. Could this be the missing link between the underwater ruins and the myths passed down for generations? Conventional archaeology remains cautious. Many of these discoveries still lack deep excavations, multidisciplinary studies, and academic consensus. But what cannot be ignored is the impact these structures have on the human mind. They are silent reminders that the past may be buried or drowned, and that the waters do not only hide fossils and coral, but memories. Memories of a time when the world was different, when the continents had other shapes, when entire civilizations flourished by the edge of seas that now seem eternally still. But the sea has motion, it has patience, it erases, but it also reveals. And perhaps little by little, as its tides retreat and its currents guide us, it is showing us the way back. Back to an origin that is not written in words, but in the submerged stones that still resist time. There is something about pyramids that transcends time and space, something that resists academic certainty and conventional explanations, a silent force, an ancestral geometry that pulses even thousands of years after their construction. From the sands of Egypt to the valleys of Mexico, from the jungles of China to the hills of Bosnia, pyramids rise as guardians of forgetting. They have not merely survived, they challenge. They challenge our logic, our timelines, and above all, our perception of the past. The most famous of all is undoubtedly the Maupay Great Pyramid of Giza. Officially attributed to Pharaoh Khufu and dated to around 2560 BCE, it is the largest of the three pyramids on the plateau and remains to this day one of the most precise structures ever built by humankind. Its base is almost perfectly level. Its stone blocks, weighing dozens of tons each, were stacked with a margin of error smaller than a credit card. Its orientation aligns with the cardinal points with near-perfect accuracy, and its original height, when multiplied by an astronomical constant, reveals the number corresponding to the speed of light. Coincidence? For a long time, the pyramids of Egypt were considered unique, but then others began to emerge. In Mesoamerica, stepped pyramids, such as those of Teotihuacan in Mexico and Tikal in Guatemala, display stunning celestial alignments. In Teotihuacan, the so-called Pyramid of the Sun holds mysterious geometric proportions and is connected to a network of underground tunnels and sealed chambers. The very layout of the complex resembles a miniature solar system. How could cultures separated by vast oceans share such similar ideas and techniques? In Afen, China, over 100 pyramids rest in the Shanxi province, hidden under vegetation and kept out of public attention for decades. Some of them have bases larger than the Egyptian pyramids. For years, authorities referred to them simply as imperial tombs, but preliminary studies suggest that their true age could be far older. They also exhibit an obsession with stellar alignment, particularly with the constellation of Orion. Then there are the Bosnian pyramids, discovered in 2005 by Samir Osmanagic. Though controversial, these structures show perfect pyramidal shapes, tunnel systems with natural ventilation, internal chambers, and even measurable emissions of radio frequencies from their apexes, a phenomenon still unexplained. If proven to be human-made pyramids, and not natural formations, their origins would date back over 30,000 years. What unites all these pyramids across continents is geometric precision, astronomical alignment, and the lack of a definitive explanation. Were they temples, tombs, observatories, or machines? Energetic structures that captured and manipulated subtle forces of Earth and cosmos. Some theories suggest that the pyramid shape concentrates energy at its peak, acting as an electromagnetic catalyst. Others point to the use of materials with specific properties that amplify natural resonant frequencies, as if they were silent generators of cosmic harmony. There's even the hypothesis that all these pyramids are interconnected. Some stand along what are known as Lee lines, supposed energy meridians that crisscross the planet. Others share identical mathematical proportions, such as the golden ratio or pi, embedded in their dimensions. And all of them, without exception, seem to carry not just stones, but encoded messages. As if the ancients had left behind a universal language, not spoken in words, but expressed through proportion, orientation, vibration. What if the pyramids are, in fact, the testimony of a forgotten science? A science that viewed the Earth as a living organism, the cosmos as a partner, and the human being as a bridge between the two. A science that didn't separate spirituality from physics, or symbol from function. In that context, pyramids would be stone books, eternal records of knowledge we are only just beginning to decipher. Because the more we advance technologically, the more these ancient structures astonish us. They do not decay, they do not collapse. They remain unshaken, towering, silent, as if they are waiting for something, as if they know that one day, someone will finally ask, What if we were not the first? There is something unsettling, and at the same time fascinating, in the silence of stone, especially when that stone is so massive, so heavy, so utterly colossal, that even modern machinery struggles to move it. Blocks weighing hundreds, even 1,000 tons, cut, transported and stacked with precision during a time when humans supposedly had only ropes, logs, and brute strength. And yet, there they are, unshaken, unexplained, and eternally present. The most famous of these stones lies in Baalbek, in present-day Lebanon. Known today for its Roman ruins, Baalbek hides beneath its columns and temples something much older and far more mysterious. At its base rest massive stones weighing over 800 tons each, perfectly fitted side by side, without mortar, without gaps, without error. One of these blocks, known as the Kawa stone of the pregnant woman, weighs approximately 1,000 tons. It is larger than a locomotive, lying partially buried in the earth, as if abandoned in the middle of an incomprehensible task. The question is inevitable. How? How did people over 2,000 years ago cut these stones with such precision? How did they transport them across uneven terrain with such absurd weight? And why? If the goal was merely construction, smaller stones would have sufficed. But no, they chose the largest blocks imaginable, as if they wanted to leave a message not only to their peers, but to all who would come after. We did this, and you don't know how. Baalbek is not alone. In Egypt, at Aswan, lies the unfinished obelisk, a stone nearly 42 meters long, weighing around 2,200 tons, which cracked before it could be moved. Even unfinished, it bears marks of astonishingly precise cutting. Modern techniques still struggle to replicate such work on such hard rock. In Bolivia, at Pumapunku, andesite blocks with flawless 90-degree angles, millimeter-deep grooves, and interlocking three-dimensional joints still baffle engineers. The stones seem molded like industrial components, but not with 20th century machinery, rather by methods attributed to civilizations that existed before the Incas. These stones, scattered across continents, cultures, and millennia, seem to tell a common story, that something in the past mastered scale, weight, symmetry, and intention with a finesse we have yet to understand. Some suggest the ancients had lost techniques like using sound vibration to reduce the weight of materials. Others speak of knowledge about natural electromagnetic fields, anti-gravity, or even manipulation of density. Bold theories, yes, but are they more far-fetched than believing people moved airplane-sized stones with ropes? The fact is, these stones cannot be ignored. They are not archaeological exaggerations. They are real. They are there, challenging time and assumptions. They force us to consider that there may have been knowledge before ours, and our ancestral engineering, lost or perhaps deliberately erased. And more than that, they invite us to think differently, to accept that the past is not linear, that humanity does not evolve in a straight line, but in waves, cycles, breaths, that perhaps there are moments of profound clarity, flashes of wisdom, that arise, build, and vanish, leaving only monuments as witnesses, because deep down each of these giant stones is a question carved in rock, a millennial riddle far too heavy to ignore, and perhaps, just perhaps, it is in the effort to answer them that we begin to remember ourselves. At a time when flying was just a dream and satellite was a meaningless word, some ancient navigators were already drawing the world with a precision that still astonishes us today. With feathers, ink, and parchment, they recorded the contours of continents that, according to official history, hadn't even been discovered yet. Maps that defy logic, that depict submerged lands, frozen shores, undersea elevations, maps that shouldn't exist, and yet they do. Preserved in libraries, studied in silence, whispering truths that time tried to erase. One of the most famous is the Piri Reis map, dated to 1513. Created by an Ottoman admiral who gave the chart its name, it was drawn, according to the author himself, based on much older sources. The map shows with astonishing detail parts of the west coast of Africa, South America, and Antarctica. Yes, Antarctica. and most impressively, without ice. Topographic details of the icy continent appear on the map as if seen from above, in a time when polar ice sheets had not yet covered those formations. This fact drew the attention of modern scientists and cartographers. In 1960, studies by the United States Air Force compared the Peary race map with seismic surveys beneath the ice, conducted by modern expeditions. The match was so precise that one researcher, Charles Hapgood, proposed a bold theory that a highly advanced civilization once existed thousands of years ago, capable of mapping the Earth with great accuracy, and that this knowledge was passed down through generations until it reached the hands of the Ottoman sailors. But Peary Rice is not alone. The Orontius Phineas map from 1531 also depicts Antarctica in remarkable detail, including rivers and mountains, all long before the continent was officially discovered. The Wabwacha map from 1737 portrays Antarctica divided into two landmasses, just as radar imagery in the 20th century later confirmed. There are also the maps of Zeno, Dulcet, Mercator, all filled with anomalies, vanished islands, perfectly drawn coastlines, and proportions that would only be possible with advanced knowledge of trigonometry and geodesy. The inevitable question arises: how were these maps made? How could they depict such precision without planes, satellite images, or modern cartographic tools? Where did the original maps that served as templates come from? Who were the Earth's first cartographers? Those who measured oceanic distances, mountain altitudes, and continental shapes when supposedly the world was still a great unexplored mystery. Some argue these maps are mere coincidences, exaggerations, or misinterpretations. But coincidence fades when patterns repeat across different documents, by different authors, in different centuries, and more, when they match scientific data that only became available recently, using 21st century technology. Some theories suggest ancient navigators may have inherited this knowledge from earlier civilizations, perhaps survivors of a global cataclysm, like the flood recounted in so many cultures. Others believe these maps are remnants of a lost global civilization, one that mastered the seas and knew the skies like an open book. A civilization whose name may be forgotten, but whose marks remain between the lines of cartography. Yet, there is also a symbolic dimension to these maps, for they do not only reveal shapes, they reveal memory. They tell us that the world was once deeply, holistically known, that there was a time when Earth was understood not as fragments, but as unity. A time when oceans did not separate, but connected, when navigators followed stars, but also followed memories of shores once seen before, perhaps in ancient dreams, perhaps in forgotten eras. These impossible maps are more than documents. They are mirrors, and they invite us to look back with different eyes, to accept that perhaps we are merely rediscovering what was once already known. And that, like a grand palimpsest, the history of Earth is being rewritten, not because it changed, but because we are finally learning how to read what was hidden beneath the layers of time. Imagine a time when the sky was not just a field of observation, but also a path to be traveled, an era in which thunder responded to human command, crystals stored power, and sound shaped matter. It's difficult to imagine such a reality, because it's not in our science books. It exists in ruins, in mythical accounts, in drawings on walls, and in the questions no one dares to ask aloud. What if ancient civilizations weren't just struggling to survive, but mastering forces we now consider science fiction? In the ancient Indian scriptures, the Vedas, we find detailed descriptions of flying machines called vimanas. These aren't metaphors. They're almost technical descriptions: shapes, materials, propulsion systems, speeds, directions. Some of these crafts were said to soar at high altitudes, crossing cities and continents. Others had the ability to float, hover, emit intense light. And there are mentions of aerial battles, of rays fired between machines, of explosions so powerful they left scorched marks on the ground. Accounts that some researchers boldly associate with nuclear or directed energy weapons. But the Indians are not alone. All over the world, we find legends about flying objects, strange weapons, and energetic devices. The gods of Egypt, for example, are often depicted with staffs and symbols that many interpret as spiritual metaphors. but some see them as prototypes of technological instruments, energy rods, conductors of electricity, amplifiers of vibration. After all, why do so many ancient temples have corridors lined with conductive materials, passages resembling ventilation systems, and walls that behave like acoustic resonators? The theory of electricity in ancient Egypt gained traction with the study of the so-called Dendera light, a relief found in the Temple of Hathor, showing figures holding what looks like a giant lamp with a serpent-shaped filament and a cable connected to a base. A visual coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps a clue that the ancient Egyptians literally knew how to manipulate light. There are also remnants resembling rudimentary batteries in Iraq, such as the famous Baghdad batteries, which could, in theory, produce an electrical current. And what if energy was obtained in another way? Some researchers suggest that certain crystals used by ancient peoples weren't just decorative or symbolic, but functioned as energy condensers, frequency amplifiers, or even vibrational data banks. The ancients knew that sound alters the structure of matter. Across cultures, from Tibet to Mexico, there are accounts of sound frequencies being used to move stones, heal illnesses, or shift states of consciousness. Pyramids, temples, megalithic circles, all seem to be constructed with meticulous attention to acoustics. In Central America, there are stories of the smoking mirrors of Tezcatlipoca, through which priests saw worlds and communicated with other realms. In ancient Greece, we hear of Archimedes' burning mirrors, said to concentrate sunlight at levels capable of igniting ships. And in medieval texts, there are mentions of stones that stored memories, of devices that could amplify the human voice to be heard for kilometers. But if all this once existed, where did it go? How did a humanity capable of mastering such technologies vanish? The possible answers are many. Catastrophes, wars, natural cycles of forgetting, or perhaps the sheer weight of knowledge demanded a pause. Perhaps some technologies can only be understood when accompanied by an equivalent level of consciousness, and when misused, they turned against their creators and were buried by the earth and by time. Today, when we speak of ancient technologies, we tend to smile with skepticism. But perhaps skepticism is not a sign of wisdom, but of forgotten memory. Because the more we look back with new eyes, the more we realize that humanity's timeline is not a ladder, it is a cycle. And in previous turns of that cycle, perhaps we already climbed high, before falling once more. And what if, by observing the past with humility, we are rediscovering the first steps towards something greater? What if the crystals, the sounds, the rods, and the skies are calling to us once again? Since the dawn of time, humans have carved marks into stone as if trying to trap time itself. In caves, temples, obelisks, megaliths, and the silent altars of vanished cultures, there are symbols, repeating forms, spirals that turn inward and outward, as if opening portals within the very rock. Triangles, circles, stars, perfect angles, proportions that echo something that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. A silent language, but universal. A language perhaps not read with the eyes, but felt with the soul. Across the entire planet, civilizations separated by oceans and millennia use the same symbols. The spiral, for example, ever present, found on the stones of Ireland, in the pyramids of Mexico, in the Nazca Lines, in the caves of Indonesia, in the petroglyphs of Patagonia. What does this form with no end mean? For some, it represents the cycle of life. For others, the movement of consciousness, DNA, galaxies, the flow of energy. The spiral is a reminder that everything turns, and that perhaps we are already returning to where we began. Sacred geometry is another recurring mystery. Hexagons, dodecahedrons, tetrahedrons, the so-called flower of life, made up of interlocking circles, appears in Egyptian temples, ancient manuscripts, Jewish synagogues, Islamic mosques, and even Christian cathedrals. The flower of life pattern contains within its structure the fundamental proportions of mathematics, music, architecture, and even modern physics. How did different peoples arrive at the same symbol? How did they know these forms contain universal laws? In Oshart, France, one of the most mysterious cathedrals in the world, was built with geometric precision that resonates with astronomical alignments and Pythagorean proportions. Its stained glass windows, columns and labyrinths were not made merely to be beautiful. They are codes, maps of the soul's journey, of spiritual ascent, of reconnection with the cosmos. In Peru, in Egypt, in India, in China, temples and monuments were not placed just anywhere. They obey specific alignments, energetic coordinates, relationships between solstices, equinoxes, and constellations, as if each structure were a cosmic instrument, a stone harp tuned to the universe. But the codes go beyond shapes. They extend into writings we cannot decipher. The Rongorongo script of Easter Island, the Phaistos disc of Crete, the glyphs of the Indus Valley, the Vincha script of Eastern Europe. Entire systems of communication that, for some reason, connect to no known modern language. Are they simply religious symbols, or fragments of a lost language, one that may never have been spoken, but chanted, vibrated, felt? The mathematics found in these structures is precise. The golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, fractal symmetry, all appear in pyramids, temples, mandalas, and ancient artifacts. Not by chance, but with intention, as if the builders wished to leave behind a message resistant to the changes of language, culture, and religion. A message that could cross time, speaking through form. And maybe that is what's most powerful about forgotten languages. They do not rely on translation. They touch us directly. When we look at a spiral carved 5,000 years ago, something within us remembers, not with words, but with a feeling, a vibration, as if we were hearing a very old whisper coming from within, a whisper that says, "You've seen this before. You were once part of this." Stones do not merely tell stories. They hold memory. And perhaps in deciphering them, we are not just studying the past. We are remembering who we once were. They came down from the sky, arriving in chariots of fire, in flying ships, in pillars of light. In their hands, they carried objects that glowed, weapons that roared like thunder, tools that healed, teachings that changed everything. They were cloaked in gold, draped in shimmering skins, with eyes that could see beyond. They were not ordinary men, but neither were they merely myths. They were called gods. Since the dawn of the oldest civilizations, stories of celestial visitors have repeated, always with disturbingly similar details. Among the crowd Sumerians, we find the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens to teach, to rule, and to reshape humanity. In Egypt, the Neteru, winged gods with hybrid appearances and advanced knowledge, descended to establish cosmic order. In Hindu texts, gods travel aboard vimanas, aerial machines capable of traversing dimensions. In Greek mythology, the gods reside on Mount Olympus, an inaccessible summit for mortals, from where they watch and intervene in the fate of humankind. In all these myths, there is a recurring pattern. The gods come from above, and not just from a symbolic sky. Often, what lies between the lines is a description of a physical, literal, and tangible descent. The sky is not heaven, but a place of origin, a dwelling, a realm not of this world, yet somehow connected to it. And what's most intriguing, these gods did not come merely to be worshipped. They came to teach, they came to build, they came to transform. They brought knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, mathematics, medicine, ethics, architecture, as if the very birth of civilization were intimately tied to contact with something higher, be it spiritual or technological. Some modern scholars interpret these stories as symbolic representations of the collective unconscious, archetypes that express humanity's innate yearning for the transcendent. Others, however, go further. They see in these tales possible encounters with non-terrestrial civilizations, real interactions, later translated into mythology by ancient cultures. Because after all, how would a people with no science, no technical vocabulary, describe a spacecraft, a spacesuit, a beam of blue light streaking across the sky? What we call angels in Judeo-Christian texts are described with wings, radiant light, trumpets, and such overwhelming presence that their arrival always begins with, "Do not be afraid." In Mayan tradition, gods came from the sea, not in ordinary boats, but in cocoons of brilliance. The Dogon people of Africa possess detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system, including stars invisible to the naked eye, long before the invention of telescopes. Where did that knowledge come from? Across every corner of the globe, there are structures said to have been built with the help of the gods. Pyramids, temples, entire cities whose origins are lost to time, yet, according to local traditions, were the work of celestial beings. In Tiwanaku, Bolivia, legend says that Viracocha, the civilizing god, emerged from Lake Titicaca and taught humans to live in peace. In Egypt, Thoth, the divine scribe, brought writing, medicine, and geometry. In India, Shiva dances the creation of the universe. In Greece, Prometheus steals fire from the gods to gift it to mankind and is punished eternally. Are these just stories? Or are they distorted memories, passed orally through the ages, slowly morphing into myth? And what if these gods were actually other humans, far more advanced, survivors of an earlier civilization, bearers of technology that seemed like magic to the unaware? Or what if they were extraterrestrials, cosmic travelers, star-bound explorers who found Earth as a world in development and chose to interact with it? As controversial as it may be, this hypothesis cannot be dismissed when we confront the sheer volume, consistency, and universality of such accounts. Yet perhaps what matters most is not where these visitors came from, but rather what they left behind. Because in every myth, the gods eventually leave. They ascend, vanish, promise to return, and what remains is the emptiness, the longing, the worship, and the knowledge. A seed, a question. The line between gods and men has always been thin. In some cultures, kings and priests claimed direct descent from the visitors. In others, contact with the celestials was reserved for the initiated, those who could read the stars, interpret the signs, meditate to touch the eternal. This suggests that the divine may not be outside, but dormant within us, and that true contact might not require spacecraft, but consciousness. Between gods and men, perhaps there is no distance. Perhaps what separates the heavens from the earth is not space, but memory. And slowly, as we listen to these ancient stories, we may be drawing closer to something that has always been with us. For a long time, myth and science walked in opposite directions. One was considered fantasy, the other truth. One lived in ancient books, in tales and symbols, the other in laboratories, calculations and telescopes. But as we move forward, as our tools grow more powerful and our eyes reach further, something surprising begins to happen. The boundaries dissolve, and what was once considered legend begins to take the shape of reality. Modern science, in all its sophistication, is beginning to touch areas that once belonged only to shamans, philosophers, and mystics. The study of DNA, for example, revealed that all human races descend from a single ancestral group, a concept already present in many ancient traditions, which spoke of a primordial people, or an original mother, who gave birth to humanity. The words may change, but the essence remains the same. In the field of astronomy, we see that many constellations named by ancient civilizations have real significance for navigation, agricultural cycles, and Earth's magnetic fields. The Egyptians, for instance, aligned their temples with Orion and beam Sirius, and today we know that these stars do influence, even if subtly, the rhythms of our planet. The Maya predicted eclipses with mathematical precision, and yet we still called it astronomical mythology, until we realized the calculations were right. Quantum physics, in turn, brought a revolution. We discovered that the observer influences what is observed, that matter at its core is energy, that particles can remain connected across vast distances, as if there were an invisible fabric linking everything. This strongly resembles what the ancients called aether, or akasha, a subtle field where everything is recorded, where all vibrates in harmony, where past, present, and future are merely reflections in the same mirror. And sound, that invisible force that moves through air, has been used for millennia as a tool for healing, building, and transformation. Today, cymatics, The science of how sound affects matter shows that sound vibrations organize sand, water, and other materials into geometric patterns identical to those found in cathedrals, mandalas, and sacred art. What was once dismissed as ritual or mystical now reveals a scientific foundation. In neuroscience, we now know that meditation alters the structure of the brain, that prayers and mantras synchronize the hemispheres, that altered states of consciousness, pursued by shamans, monks, and ascetics, activate regions of the brain related to compassion, creativity, and holistic perception. In other words, what was once treated as faith, spirituality, or legend now echoes within the body itself, in the deepest layers of biology. And in archaeology, deep excavations have unearthed the impossible, structures older than official history admits. Sophisticated tools found in soil layers dating back tens of thousands of years, recurring symbols in continents that never met, maps showing the world before it was discovered. All of this forces science to step back, to observe with humility, to admit that history might need to be rewritten, or rather, reread, because myth is not a lie. Myth is memory, a symbolic, poetic, living memory, pulsing beneath the foundations of reason. When science finally opens itself to myth, it doesn't deny it. It confirms it. It doesn't diminish it. It deciphers it. And at that point of convergence, something new emerges, an invisible thread that stitches together data and dreams, experiments and meditations, equations and mantras, a thread that invites us to see the world not as a fragmented puzzle, but as an integrated mosaic, where everything makes sense, even if that sense is still in the making. Perhaps the future of science is not about control, it's about reconnection, the recognition that truth can be sung, danced, drawn in stone, before it is measured in graphs, because when science and myth meet, the impossible begins to seem only forgotten. Perhaps we will never know for sure. Perhaps the answers are not hidden in stones or maps or in the skies, but in the silence that exists between one question and the next, in the pause between what was forgotten and what is about to be remembered. We walk through sunken ruins, hear the echoes of buried temples, decode ancient geometries, feel the weight of millennia-old stones and the breath of stories whispered by the stars. We speak of gods and machines, of impossible maps, of temples that shouldn't exist, of ships that flew when no one was supposed to fly. And with each step, the line between myth and science has grown thinner, more beautiful, more real. Because in the end, what we seek is not just the truth of the past. It's the meaning of the present. It's the recognition that perhaps we were never only what we were told, that perhaps we are heirs to something far greater, something that pulses within us like a nameless memory, an ancestral calling that stirs when we gaze upon a pyramid, when we hear an ancient song, when we feel that the world holds more than what the eyes can see. And what if all of this, these ruins, these legends, these mysteries, are only the beginning? What if we are on the edge of a new memory, a new understanding, not a repetition of the past, but a reunion with what was never truly lost, only dormant? The forgotten history of the earth may not be hidden in caves or the depths of the ocean. Perhaps it lives within each of us, etched in our bones, encoded in our dreams, reflected in our silences. You, who have listened to this journey until now, perhaps you feel it, not with your mind, but with something older, something deeper, something that cannot be measured, but that knows. Perhaps this is not the end. Perhaps now, everything is truly beginning.